Now, we're going to talk to a guy who understands the risk-reward all too well. He is the assistant sports editor of the South Bend Tribune and Notre Dame's beat writer, Eric Hansen, joining BYU Sports Nation. Eric, welcome to the show. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
We're great. We appreciate you taking some time with us today. Now, BYU is beginning a new venture this year in terms of loading up the schedule that really Notre Dame has been doing for, it seems like, decades. And that is creating very competitive schedules. So with that backdrop, what is it that Notre Dame does to get through a gauntlet of a schedule year in and year out? How do they manage that?
Well, it's difficult. You know, some years I think they'd like to ease into the schedule a little bit more and be able to find out a little bit more about their team before they had to play somebody of national stature that was really going to expose all their flaws in a maybe painful way. But Notre Dame hasn't been able to do that too much. You know, they had the series with Michigan that was usually either the first or second game of the season for so many years. They open with Texas this year at home, and I think Texas on the road next year. So there's not a real break-in period for them. It's just the mentality. I mean, I think the one thing that benefits when you start with a really strong part of your schedule first is that you have the players' attention in August. You have people working hard in the summer, and you have a focus knowing that first game or the first couple games really is going to determine whether you're in the playoff or in past years the BCS or not.
Eric Hansen with us of the South Bend Tribune. He is Notre Dame's beat writer. When we look at the kind of schedule that is best for an independent, let's take 2015 Notre Dame, for example. We just went through the prime 5 games of the Irish, including that Texas game to open up, then at Georgia Tech, at Clemson, USC at home, at Stanford. By no means an easy run through some of the best of college football. What is best in the teams that you've watched and the schedules that you've watched Notre Dame go through? What's the best model for success?
Well, I mean, and we're looking at a different model, though, I think, with the playoff era, because the strength of schedule counts, I think, a lot more in this era. Before, if Notre Dame got in the top 14 of the BCS, their drawing power would pull them into a pretty good bowl game. Now the selection committee not only assigns the playoff teams, they assign the other New Year's Six bowls. So Notre Dame's schedule is not only going to have to be good, it's going to have to be good in November. And I think as I look at BYU scheduling as it's trying to toughen things up, they're front-end loaded. You look at the back end of their schedules, and I think that's where they're going to have difficulty picking up momentum for a playoff spot is who they're playing in November. The ACC has been pretty flexible, this new ACC plan in terms of dates and so forth. But it's difficult to get teams other than the ACC teams to play you out of conference in November. Some teams will do it. Certainly USC and Stanford do it for Notre Dame, and there's been some others. But it's typical. Big Ten doesn't like to play you in November, and some of the other conferences don't like to go that direction either.
Eric, do you think that could a team schedule, a list of teams, a competition they're going to play against that's too difficult? You know, where do you draw the line?
Well, I think you can. You have to have some balance, and I think just the nature of Notre Dame being a 7-5 team, 7 home games and 5 away teams, you're going to have at least one team and maybe 2 where you have them at home and you don't have to return the trip. And usually those teams aren't, the world beater teams. Every once in a while somebody will have a strong year. I know BYU looks like they're operating on a 6-6 model. But yeah, the other thing is styles. I mean, people can look at Navy and say, well, they're not really a very good team. They're not a national power. But they're tucked between this year Clemson and USC, which are nothing like Navy. And to prepare for that triple option, they'll have to do it twice this year because they play Georgia Tech too. Is a real pain in the butt. Notre Dame has a bad history they've beaten Navy quite often, but usually the week after they have problems getting back to playing a conventional offense. So there's some tricks in terms of style. It's not just, who you're playing. It's the style of the team that you're playing and where they're placed on the schedule, using bye weeks. All those things are really important in terms of scheduling. I just had a conversation with Notre Dame's athletic director about scheduling last week, and we talked about did the playoff, implications, did that really change what you're doing in terms of scheduling? He said no, because we knew we needed to get some SEC series, and they do have a couple scheduled coming up later in this decade with Georgia and Texas A&M. They have a home and home with each of those. So they kind of realized going in that they were going to have to be diverse enough, maybe not in a one-year period, but in a two-year period, to try to hit all the major conferences.
Yeah, Jack Swarbrick definitely has his hands full and has done a fantastic job, clearly, managing the schedules at Notre Dame, and perhaps was granted a favorable situation when the ACC said, hey, we want to have 5 games with you each year. Now, BYU would obviously be open to an agreement with the P5 conference like the one that Notre Dame has with the ACC, but how specifically does that tie-in with the Atlantic Coast Conference help Notre Dame, even though you lose annual games like Michigan and Michigan State?
Well, I think they did it so that they could get into the ACC and basketball and the other sports. They needed to have somewhere for those sports to go when the Big East was collapsing. And so they entered this deal, and I think they average 5 games a year. The ACC is pretty flexible with them. There's a couple of years they play 4, a couple of years they play 6. This is one of the years that they play 6. And the thought was the ACC was going to be strong and maybe get stronger, and that will help your schedule. I've talked to some bowl reps who think that there are going to be years where this hurts Notre Dame, where they're going to have too many NC States and Dukes on the schedule and not enough Florida States and Clemsons. And Notre Dame has to be cognizant of that in those years, that they better have Georgia that year, or they better have Texas A&M that year to maybe balance that. But you get 5 Power 5 teams with that arrangement, and that those are games that are scheduled way out until 2025. They've got Notre Dame knows who they're playing, what dates they're playing, home or away. So that's something that they know is there, they can count on, and they can work around. And they do get some variety in that. You're not playing the same ACC teams every year. So I think that's a positive. And it's in part of the country where they want to recruit. So that's a positive for Notre Dame as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eric, how do the Irish fans react to the schedule? What's the fans' expectations year in and year out?
You would think it would be different. Like when they see UMass, they groan. They're not. They don't want that. When I grew up, I grew up in Ohio, and we used to go to Ohio State games, and we kind of loved the bloodbath non-conference games. That was part of the culture, and then you'd have some close games maybe in your conference with Michigan and maybe one or two of the other teams. But Notre Dame fans want a killer schedule. They don't care what it does to their team. They don't want to go to the UMass game. They don't want to, if Temple plays at Notre Dame, they don't really get too jazzed about that. They didn't like when San Diego State came. That wasn't a popular game for them. Weren't crazy about Nevada. But a team like BYU, they respect. They like BYU because BYU has done some things nationally. They're always a pretty good team. I don't know when the last time they had a losing record. So it's kind of funny how they go with this, but it's kind of an elitist attitude. They don't want they don't like the cupcakes on the schedule.
You got to go back to 2004 for the last time BYU did have a losing schedule, and you already answered my next question, which was how do the fans view BYU? And all the BYU fans would love nothing more than to have a team like Notre Dame, who is a fellow independent and a model that BYU fans respect and want to follow. In your opinion, what are the chances that BYU and Notre Dame fulfill at least a measure of the remaining agreement that they set up back in 2011, and we see another game in the near future?
Yeah, I don't know that that's realistic just because of the playoff era and the pressure being on Notre Dame to get out and to get into the Big 12 and the SEC. You know, they've had to cut back on Big 10 games, and so they're really and they want to preserve their rivalries against USC, Stanford, and Navy especially. They like to finish the season in California on the road, either Stanford or USC, and the team that they don't play at the end of the season, the other California team comes to Notre Dame in October. So they've got a nice rhythm there, and it doesn't leave a lot of spots left to get some variety. I think the worry is with scheduling BYU is where is that program going? Is Independence going to tamp it down in terms of its prowess? Or are they going to find a way to make this work and be as good as they always have? And I'm kind of curious, too. You know, for someone that doesn't study them a lot, I think they would be a good addition to either the Big 12 or the Pac-12. I realize the TV numbers aren't there, but it's a broad-based program that seems to be good in just about every sport and has some kind of following. But I don't know the whole politics of what's going on there. But I would think BYU would want to get in the conference at some point. But I don't know a lot about what their intentions are right now, especially if they want to get into the playoff.
Yeah, well, without a doubt, I can tell you they want to be in a Power 5 conference 100%. And, you know, it's my opinion, but I feel like they are scheduling up and trying to follow the Notre Dame model so that they can get noticed more and be in the prime spotlight. And if they win some more games, maybe they do become more attractive to a Power 5 conference. But for now, it's independence. I want to finish with this. It would clearly help BYU to have a series with Notre Dame. But would it help Notre Dame in their pursuit of the college football playoff year in and year out?
See, that's where I think they the two things, the ACC agreement and Notre Dame trying to get some variety in their schedule, makes it more difficult to make the BYU thing happen. If you could guarantee Jack Swarbrick BYU is going to be 10-2 in those seasons, you know, that they're going to be an opponent that the College Football Playoff Committee is going to look at as a Power 5 team, then I think Notre Dame would do that. But I don't know that there's that guarantee. And again, we don't know where this independent experience is going to go with BYU. Is it going to make them a worse football program, or is it going to make them better? Or are they going to stay about the same? Again, as I look at their future schedules, you know, my concern with them trying to get into the playoff again is those Novembers. They are front-end loaded. They've got some really good opponents in September and some in October, but there's not a lot of really competitive teams in November that are going to help their status with the playoffs. And again, if you lose the coach that you have now and bring somebody else in down the road, are they going to be as successful? I think those are questions that Jack Swarbrick answers, and he says, man, I've got to get 5 ACC, 2 Pac-12 teams in every year, so that's 7. And then I need some variety. You know, I'm going to play Navy, that's 8. And then the other 4 teams, you know, maybe there is a year that BYU fits. But,
yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I think, again, there's really it's not at the top of his priority list. I know getting Michigan back on the schedule, for example, is. It's going to be harder for BYU, too, with those Big Ten teams after 2017. I think I looked at their schedule, and they have some series scheduled, but it's going to be harder when the Big Ten goes to 9 league games, and if anybody else decides to go to 9 league games, that's going to make it harder for both Notre Dame and BYU.
Great stuff with Eric Hansen, the Notre Dame beat writer for the South Bend Tribune. Eric, we appreciate the time, and I do want to throw this out there. BYU is trying something new this year, and they do have a game at Arrowhead Stadium on November 14th against Missouri out of the SEC. And so this is new, and you're right. The recent past has not proven to show that BYU has loaded November schedules, but perhaps this is the Cougars turning the corner and I think you're absolutely right. You have to have loaded Novembers to stay nationally relevant, and Notre Dame and Jack Swarbrick are making that a priority. Great stuff, man. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks for having me on. Take care.